The first Turbo Levo was fat and, if we're honest, tended to wheeze a touch on steep climbs, but in design terms presented a defining moment for the sport, one that set the standard of what EMTBs look like today. But it was not Specialized's first venture into electric. In fact, the whole business of turbo was born a decade ago, and this is the first of them, the Turbo S, launched in March 2012. But for those of us who don't spend all our time on dusty, blown-out streets, it's the other bikes, the Turbo Levo and the Turbo Evo, which are possibly a bit more important. The thing is, the story of Turbo, it really is loaded with layer upon layer of development. It really is unique, and you could argue that it is unlike any other. If we rewind the clock, it's true to say that the EMTB world had already gained massive momentum by around 2015, and the guys at Specialized knew they were massively behind. But how were they going to do it? Had they even started?
When we had the puzzle pieces together for what we consider a perfect e-mountain bike for us, again, there was no project, there was nothing. We just built a prototype based on old stump jumper parts, some CNC parts. We asked somebody to weld it together. It looked ugly, but it performed really well, surprisingly. And so we presented this to the executive team in Morgan Hill, and there were a couple of market managers there, and they saw that and they agreed to the opportunity to have resources for this, because we didn't have any at that time. We actually had to make room, and we killed projects. So at that time, the Swiss office, we had like still less than 10 people. But the answer or the direction was really clear: do nothing but Levo. There was a great celebration, but also put a lot of pressure on us, because at that point then we had to deliver.
There were the conversations: are we going to build this on our own with the turbo product, or are we going to buy off the shelf? Those were the biggest conversations we've had. We met with various people who tried to give us the full off-the-shelf program, but then that didn't build the product we wanted, because it had these restraints, right? You had to use this battery, this display, this motor, and at that point we said, like, okay, if we want to have the dream product, we need to do everything. At the very beginning, let's say when we started 2009-10, we did the first Turbo S, the active bike, a fast bike, L1E with a license plate. That was before Levo. We had tough times because that was a very niche market, and the sales or the success was not so great. But then when we started doing the mountain bike, and the success changed drastically, like it overnight became a thing.
Now, whilst we know the story of Turbo in itself is a decade old, many of you will know that the Turbo Levo wasn't actually launched until July 2015. Now, what was becoming clear around this time is that a lot of brands were taking the motor and the battery off motor manufacturers, and the problem at the time was that things were becoming a little bit similar. So there definitely was a need for individuality in the EMTB world, and Specialized, well, they certainly knew that they had an ace up their sleeve. The key people behind the push for e-bikes within Specialized were all based in California, but it wasn't long before they realised that things needed to move across the Atlantic. The main e-bike market was in Europe. They needed to be at the core, surrounded by the riders, the innovators, and the skill. Now, you guys were working on this little beauty. I think is this 2011, 2012 vintage?
No, it's probably 12 and a half. What you have in your hand though is fully plastic. I mean, that's not even carbon. There's some wood inside and some Bondo on top.
And this is the first sample, right?
That was the first industrial design intent, like how it should look like.
Right.
Yes.
And I'm sure you have to agree, folks, is that even by today's e-mountain bike standards, it's a beautiful looking bike, isn't it? The key part of Turbo is the vision the guys have behind it. The philosophy of living for the ride, not the buttons and displays. It needed to be about engaging in the trail and not looking at dashboards, about the rider, not the power. More than this, Specialized wanted low noise. They wanted the bikes to look like mountain bikes. And then there was the app. Oh yes, the Mission Control app. A small team of 10 people, small budget, but immense impact. For many off-roaders, the world really was changed when Specialized launched the Levo 7 years ago. It marked a monumental shift in the image of EMTBs, and some people would argue that actually it was the first true EMTB with MTB geometry.
The big success of the Levo was, to me, there's two reasons. One is it was the first bike that looked like a mountain bike. It wasn't like a bolt-on battery, external batteries, etc. It's the first e-mountain bike that you looked at, like, whoa, this is the future. And the second reason is it also rode like a mountain bike. It had the proper geometry, proper suspension, proper brakes. I mean, we'd like to focus always on e-components, but all the other components, the chassis, the performance on the trail, it felt like a real mountain bike.
The bike itself featured 135mm travel, was known as the Turbo Levo 6 Fatty due to its 3-inch tyres. It had an internal 500 watt-hour battery, proper mountain bike geometry, hell, it even had an app. But more than this, it just looked right. It was silent, ahead of the game, oh yes.
Here with Mike Sinyard, who is the founder of Specialized. These bikes, they offer so much for so many people, don't they? I mean, sort of maybe older people or injured, and maybe some people that are probably scared of mountain biking.
Or people that just want to go fast. I would say initially when the team proposed some time back doing an electric bike, I said, no way. I said, that's too pedestrian for our brand. And they said, Mike, you know, shut up and just try this thing. And I would say that's it. The ride decides. And when you ride this machine going up, you're getting a heck of a workout. And you can do things you never did. And it's basically you, only faster. It's incredible.
And so, launched in 2015, the Levo was actually relaunched in 2016. I travelled to Moab in the spring of that year, scepticism of e-bikes still rife amongst many journos. But so it was that a group of riders ranging from 24 to 67 years old rode for 4 days all day long on insanely tech climbs and long descents. Over a margarita or two in downtown Moab, this was the moment I thought, yeah, EMTB really is happening. The first Levo then was very much a watershed moment in MTB history, and an uppercut to those who had other visions about what EMTB was all about. The bigger hitting brother, the 180mm Kenevo, was launched in 2017 and capable of all kinds of nonsense. But the next key event in off-road terms was when the Generation 2 Levo emerged from the crystal waters of Croatia in 2018. A bike that wasn't just an e-bike, but one that had drawn expertise from people who really deeply knew about the soul and importance of MTB, geometries, suspension design, feeling. The Gen 2 Levo bike was very much state-of-the-art, 40% more range with a 700 watt-hour battery that now slotted into rather than out of the down tube. It had moved up to 150mm travel, 29-inch wheels, 11-speed, not 12. There were more sizes, the bikes were bigger and the geometry tuned into the needs of EMTB much more. It was very much a story of evolution, the bike a rocket ship, and, as Mike Sinyard pointed out, hugely important.
I would say it's the most important bike we've ever made.
Now, of course, the Levo and the Kenevo featured the Brose 90Nm motor. But Specialized felt that they needed a bike that bridged MTB to EMTB, hence the introduction of the all-new SL in 2019 with a much lighter 35Nm motor. Now, whilst most of us have got our attention firmly placed on the trail rather than the traffic, Turbo is now a massive part of Specialized. Obviously, we've just talked about some of the off-road bikes, the mountain range, which comprises of both the Levo and the Kenevo in full power or SL lightweight versions, but they've also got road bikes such as the Creo and also the Active line, which features the Vado and the Como in both SL and full power versions. They've even got people from Britain to come and work in Switzerland. John, for example. The Kenevo took another monumental step in 2019, steeper seat tube angle, sizing and battery being the big changes. And then again in 2019, the Turbo Vado. Remember that Turbo is much more than EMTB. I did my first city to summit on this very bike. 2019, the Turbo Creo was also launched, road and gravel, and now in the mix with some incredibly capable bikes. Now, as some of the guys at Specialized mentioned, they want their bikes to be better, not just different when they introduce new models. And in 2021, there were 6 major changes to the 3rd Gen Levo, which was launched in March 2021. And those 6 different things were a wheel size change, a geometry adjust, motor update, microtune mastermind, and of course, they introduced the all-new S sizing to their e-bikes. This was the fruition of much of the hard graft which had been done on the app. The bike a lot more full on than previous Levos, taking the downs as seriously as the ups. The biggest evolution the Levo's ever seen. It marked a big change for the Levo for sure. It attempted to shut out water with a load more doorways, new firmware making the boot bike smoother and more neutral. It is 150-160mm travels. The wheel is now 29-27.5 mix. A story of refinement, 3 different head angles, raise or lower the bottom bracket by 7mm. They introduced Mastermind, the brains behind the bike, how you and the motor interact. It had watts per kilometre, over-the-air updates, and 6 sizes. And so to 2021 when the Kenevo SL was born, 180mm travel, a bike that followed in the footsteps of Levo SL, but a bike that could conquer trails like no other e-bike. So fast. A brief history of Turbo then, and without doubt more developments will follow pretty soon. Okay, let's fast forward then. Let's fast forward to the future. What is the future? What's the future for Turbo?
I'm not going to tell you. But what I can tell you is we're going to stay true to what we are. Like putting the rider in the center, delivering true performance benefits. Yes, we are working on a couple game-changing projects because this is fun. Obviously, what exactly this is, I'm not going to disclose. But we are here to deliver products that are still fun to ride and are just different to what the market offering is.
Behind these bikes then, a team of people who know EMTB intimately well. Turbo is now a huge part of Specialized, and in the Levo, a bike that very much leads the way, opening up EMTB to new riders going to fresh places. Well, what are you waiting for?